as we have posted on the town's website. For this meeting, we simply, going forward, are going to announce the names of the board members. We don't have to announce the names of the speakers or our employees on the call. When somebody speaks, please identify yourself. If you are a town employee and we are asking you to do this as part of the agenda, please state who you are and what town or board you represent. So I am John Jeffries, the chairman of the Board of Selectmen. Ms. Hunter, would you please state you are present? Mr. Springett, would you please state you are present?
Present.
Terrific. Thank you very much. We are going to move to citizens' comments. Are there any citizens' comments? And Kate, I'm going to ask you for your help if you can see if we have any citizen comments.
We don't.
Thank you very much. We are going to move. I just lost your agenda, so I apologize. Quite literally went right off the screen.
See, this is what happens, John. You over prepare.
Exactly.
John, 1.1 presentation on Dover's fiscal year 2021 in review.
Thank you, Mr. Chair of last week. If you, Mr. Dwelly, would you be so kind?
I would be honored. Thank you. Kate,
bless.
mind bringing up the presentation? Thank you. All right. So as is customary, I'd like to do a recap of progress, of the past year's progress towards the board's goals. It's a nice end cap to the fiscal year to reflect back on all of the great work and that's been done throughout the community by almost everybody in the community, and to really see how far we've come over the past 12 months. So the next slide provides an overview of our overall status towards the board's goals, as well as the focus areas within those goals. And these are the goals that were set by the board late last summer, early in the fall. And they focused primarily around the major areas that have been an area of focus for the board over many years, around modernization, long-term financial planning, land use and open space matters, as well as general town governance structure. So I'm happy to say that overall we've been able to move forward and complete and accomplish almost everything that the board has explicitly set out for the community to accomplish. There are a few things that are still in progress, and I'll go over those in detail in future slides. But these areas are really multi-year efforts that don't necessarily fit themselves kind of neatly within a 12-month framework and in order to be accomplished. So the following slides has a detail of each one of these focus areas that I'll review for the board this evening. So the first around modernization was to better leverage the website. Last year, we were coming off the rollout and implementation of a brand new website that had a new look and feel, was hopefully easier for people to use, and had a lot more functionality and capabilities that we could leverage as an organization. So this year, we spent a lot of time focusing on how we better leverage that application and those capabilities to better serve our residents and our customers. So a few things to note here. One is, as we rolled the website out, we wanted to take some time to get feedback. It was a new website. It was a new experience. It was a new design. People had to kind of reorient themselves to finding information that they typically knew how to just easily get to, whether those were agendas or a departmental page. So the website survey really helped us gauge the user experience transitioning from the old website to the new website. So that was a really great exercise because we were able to engage the community on their experience, but we were also able to hear some really great some really great things that could be changed, that we ultimately did change. So that's a really great feedback loop there. Of those things that we changed were primarily we reduced the number of clicks. So the way the websites are kind of structured, you can think of them as kind of like a hierarchical database. We don't necessarily need to have people drill down into 5 subpages to get to a meeting agenda. So where that was possible, we were able to eliminate as many clicks as possible so people could get right to the information that they wanted to. The same with agenda. We did with the agenda center, Kate and the website team did a really good kind of, I'll call it a hack, to be able to get around the multiple clicks and really get the agenda linked right from the calendar on the web page, which was really intuitive. Some communities, to get around it, just kind of copied and pasted the agenda within the screen, but it had character limitations and it didn't kind of transform over as well. So the addition of the link was a really intuitive way to be able to accomplish that. The other thing that was really important for us was to be able to implement online tools to expand the utility of the website. So the idea of a website is not only a kind of informational hub and informational portal, but it should also be kind of a digital town hall, if you will. And so we want to be able to provide residents with as many online and digital experiences as possible, and as we do for in-person experiences at the townhouse. So we were able to roll out online transfer station stickers where people could get their transfer station stickers entirely online rather than kind of the back and forth snail mail process that we had before. We were also able to provide the community with burn permit notifications, both the application of the burn permit, but also the notification of when you were able to burn. Before that, you had to make a phone call actually to the police department each morning to determine whether or not the weather was permissible for you to be able to burn. And we also digitized a lot of our licenses and forms around special alcohol licenses and all of the great work that Dave has highlighted last week in his presentation about taking a manual PDF document that would have to be downloaded, printed, written on, scanned, and then emailed back. That all can be done now right from your computer. And the other thing that I'd highlight is that we were able to expand our social media efforts and our social media team. Oftentimes, unless individuals are signed up for automatic notifications to the website, or if they just go there to find certain information, it's easy to miss a lot of the information that we post on the website. So social media is a nice way to be able to also highlight things that are going on in the community and that are also on the website. So as people are going about their day scrolling through their social media accounts, they can get a nice notification from the town. And it's another way to update them on what's going on and then drive them to the website. So on the next focus area around modernization, we focused on what we've dubbed a townwide culture of management. And this is really around processes, policies, and procedures, I'd say. So the first is we developed concrete project plans in our core focus areas around our HR and personnel efforts, our internal financial operation recommendations, as well as some of our higher visibility projects, such as the time and attendance implementation, as well as the website. These project plans allowed the staff teams to be able to really kind of focus, stay on task, and be able to iteratively make progress through these efforts. And I think by implementing these project plans, it helped us succeed in implementing many of the projects that we'll outline this evening. The other thing that was really important for us to do this year was to reestablish, I'd say, regular management and staff training sessions. We have gone digital for the most part for these training sessions. They used to be in person at certain intervals, but we were able to, through Kate, leverage our Maya Insurance Company's online tutorial and training portal to be able to offer on-demand trainings for staff. So as they get, half an hour in their day or during lunch break, hop on and learn something new, they're able to do that digitally. And the last thing around the townwide culture management is, oftentimes we get so busy working on projects and just get caught up in the day-to-day of the organization that we sometimes, forget to either document our processes so that, those who come after us have to kind of recreate the wheel, or it's a little bit more difficult for us to even remember back to a decision that was made. So a great emphasis over the past year has been pretty much everything that we do needs to be documented and codified. And the board will recognize this and remember this from the many policies that were before you this year that you reviewed, crafted, and endorsed: email, social media, surplus property, and the like. The next area on modernization is actually our long-term financial planning. And this was around implementing financial reserve policies. So 2 years ago, we undertook an effort to look at all of the potential reserve policies that we could implement. And those are primarily around the areas of free cash, general stabilization, and then special stabilization, such as capital stabilization, open space stabilization, OPEB. And the decision was made this year to focus solely on the capital stabilization. So I can skip over, I think, all of this because, happy to see that be presented to the town and voted on at this year's annual town meeting, which is a really great thing. I think the next step, now that we've got a capital stabilization fund set up, is for the board to consider formalizing essentially a capital funding policy, or how the town should pay for capital based on certain monetary thresholds. I think that's an important kind of supplemental component to the capital stabilization fund. And so this will be this note will be part of our conversation, part of the materials that I send over to the board as you begin to set goals for next fiscal year. The next focus area in long-term financial planning was to implement the DOR report recommendations. As everyone will recall, we had the revenue come in and do an internal audit of the town's financial operations. And while the town is on very good financial footing and has really good practices and procedures in place, there are certainly areas that we can also improve on to better serve our internal customers as well as our external customers. So we developed out a roadmap to implement these recommendations. There were quite a few, and so we carved those up and separated those out based on a couple of years, prioritized in that way, and we're able to get a few accomplished this year. So the first was expanding our utility of our Vadar general ledger system. So we migrated over to a new general ledger system 2 years ago. And kind of the natural next progression of that is to be able to expand on its functionality and its utility. So both the treasurer collector and the accountant have started to better use Vadar to be able to better automate existing kind of paper-based processes, but also kind of better track, I would say, or more easily share information amongst themselves. So this primarily has to do with the areas of cash turnovers, as well as reconciliations. The other thing that we're able to do this year, thanks to the board's blessing a few weeks ago, was implement cash management services, also known as a lockbox. As our interim finance director and treasurer collector explained and presented a few weeks ago, this outsources the intake of tax bills and that the processing of them to a private company. So it reduces the amount of time that we're spending, that staff are spending on opening bills, entering checks into our system, and just dealing with the general processing of payments. Now we get a daily file of these that goes right into our system to free staff up to focus on some of our other focus areas. And lastly, for this year, we've begun in earnest the implementation of our electronic time and attendance. This is another paper process that is quite burdensome and redundant and can open the town up to liability in the cases of improper tracking on paper. And we're nearing completion on implementing the first phase, which is the first half of town departments on July 1. So not only will this improve our internal kind of financial operation as it relates to payroll and paid time off, but it also provides a benefit to staff, whereas they'll now be able to have an electronic portal to look at their paid time off, as well as be able to download their W-2s and their pay stubs every 2 weeks. Our next steps for next year will be to detail out for the board the next phase of the DOR recommendations and the actual particular projects that we plan to work on and accomplish next year.
So Chris, is that something you envision we should sort of talk about at the goal setting session?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So my plan was, so with the orange kind of tables here, I've added these in. These are new for this year, but I figured, a lot of the things that we do kind of, they go from year to year. They don't just necessarily fit within a year, right? We start something and we move to the next phase and then a following phase. So where there was kind of a next phase or next stage, I just wanted to tee that up for the board this evening. And then, have all this information packaged for you differently so that you can focus on and then have a conversation about what your goals and priorities are for next year.
I wonder, it's more work, but I'm wondering if we should also keep like a historic list of the tasks that we've accomplished, like all the different things we've done in each of the areas. Because 5 years from now, we're going to forget where we came from.
Yeah, that's another benefit. That's a great point. And we should do that. And that's one of the added benefits of those project plans that I'd mentioned,
right,
by establishing them for, especially around our internal financial work. We're able to kind of have that roadmap that we can look back on, even a decade from now and see how far we've come.
Right. Because I was just trying to remember what did we accomplish last year, and I remember it being an impressive list, and yeah. I can't remember. I was actually going to go and dig through the presentations.
Well, last year's presentation is on the website, so I guess that'd be the easiest way to do it right now.
Right. Well, I also have like a set of files and everything in folders. So.
Mm-hmm. All right. On our next area around long-term financial planning is around implementing internal financial control policies. This kind of is related to the prior two objectives. The one objective around internal financial operations and improvement, and also the one prior to that around documenting what we're doing. So this is really about documenting our internal financial policies. So a few unrelated things or somewhat related things to that overall objective. We created and issued budget reports for the board and for other stakeholders so that you could see year-to-date expenditures throughout the year to be able to track spend and better inform budgeting decisions as we head into budget season. And then we also more broadly developed out a set of internal policies and procedures for everything that we do. We did not, unfortunately, get a chance to finalize those. It's quite a bit of work to go through each of them and kind of build consensus and document everything amongst everything that the finance team does and also everything that we had in front of us this year. So this was something that we had hoped to accomplish this year that we weren't able to accomplish this year. but will carry over into next year. And
But I
this,
think what we did accomplish was all the great COVID communication and the task force, which wasn't on our
yeah,
goal list, but
there are plenty of things that we're able to also,
Right,
accomplish this year that
right.
didn't fit, that
You know
don't
what?
fit easily into these.
right. And that was a huge undertaking.
Mhm. Hopefully almost over.
I think so.
On the next area, this shifts now to the goal around land use and open space. And the focus area this year was on the Hale Reservation Task Force. And so leading into last year's town meeting, the task force had voted on and determined that it made the most sense, and then presented to the board that we should go and undertake an appraisal of the property to get a sense of the current value of it, but also to better inform the community and the policymakers' decisions on how they want to approach Hale as the proposal is currently before us. So we contracted with an appraisal firm, and that work is underway. And in speaking with our land use director, that actually should wrap up in the next few weeks, which is good, and which is a fast schedule. So in speaking with members of the task force and with Courtney, it sounds like the summer and the fall will really be, the task force will really be working in earnest to shape out what a proposal could look like, or a recommendation could look like to the community as it relates to the Hale proposal. So a key thing to be able to do that was to get the appraisal, the appraiser in and appraisal done, which is close to getting wrapped up. The next area on land use and open space was to recruit and hire a land use director to support and lead all of our land use initiatives. This was a carryover from last year, after we were so graciously authorized by town meeting to fund this position, a new position for the town of Dover, but one certainly that's been recognized as a critical role in town. And we went through the recruitment process the middle of this year, and we're happy to have Courtney Starling join us as our first ever land use director. Courtney comes to the town with nearly 2 decades of planning and land use experience, not only in Massachusetts, but in some other New England states, and has been a really fantastic addition to the team and to the community. The next area around land use was around master planning, and so this is one of those areas that it takes a bit of time to actually put together a master plan. But some of the action areas that we're able to accomplish once we had on board with our stakeholders in the community, the planning board and conservation commission and board of selectmen, were to first prioritize your components of the master plan, and so the prioritization of those based on policymaker feedback were around housing, open space, and transportation. And so we're able to start to move forward and actually shaping out and putting together individual, kind of consider them sub-plans, if you will, toward the master plan. So the housing production plan is in progress. It should be wrapped up, at least in terms of a draft form, for the planning board and for the board to review, and other community stakeholders later this summer and early in the fall. And the open space plan is nearing completion as well. And one of the things that I'd highlight of importance as it relates to accomplishing the completion of the open space plan is that having this plan on file with the state opens up the community to many grant opportunities. And I know that's a priority of the boards and many in the community to look toward funding avenues for open space preservation in town. So I view that as an important precursor to accomplish that effort. The next area is around water resources, and certainly, gosh, I think it was almost around this time last year where we went through our boil water order for a month, and it was quite an active year as it relates to water related efforts in town. The first was the board was able to negotiate a new agreement with Colonial Water Company that incorporated a lot of new wins essentially for the community around priority areas that are important. These include the water company providing to the town leak detection on the entire system to both help our not only the capital infrastructure but also on our water conservation efforts, as well as a commitment to better keep the community informed and updated of the utility and of their efforts. We also received funding this year to fund the evaluation of a long-term, essentially broad-based study around water resources for the community. So that will allow us to start next fiscal year moving forward on these efforts to go out and procure a consultant and bring one on so that we can understand the totality of water resources and all of our disparate efforts that have been occurring in town and really string together one cohesive water resources related effort for the future. On the next area, Kate. This was the last goal area around government structure, and the focus area here was to support Dover's volunteer base. This is certainly something that we hope to do and strive to do every day, but there were a few particular things that we've been working on this year. The first is to develop a training curriculum for boards and committees, very similar to the curriculum that was developed for staff, but with a little bit of a different focus. So this year we're able to have training sessions on open meeting law, public records law, affordable housing. And we're looking to essentially just build out a schedule of those types of training opportunities, as well as expand on those opportunities so that Dover's volunteer base can easily hop online, see what's available to them, either as a new committee member or an existing committee member, and find some really hopefully valuable information and training sessions. And the other is to create a volunteer handbook. And this coincides and relates to an earlier statement around codifying a lot of what we do. I think it's helpful for our volunteers, both new and existing, to be able to have kind of one resource document to be able to refer to and reference to. And so we've got a draft of that complete, putting some finishing touches on it, and are then going to be working with some board and committee members on their input as committee members so that we can incorporate any of their feedback before we put together a final draft for the board's review. The other thing that I'd note that was helpful that we started at the end of last year, continued this year, and will continue in the future, is to hold monthly office hours with town council. We found through feedback that that's been a really helpful opportunity for committee members to be able to sit down with town council and just either talk about a specific question or issue that they might have, and to just generally have a conversation with her about matters within their realm. The next area is around creating synergy between boards and committees. And there were a couple of things of note that we worked on this year. The first was working with the Park and Rec Commission and the Cemetery Commission on the DPW organizational assessment. that community paradigm put together for us and presented to the board. Next year is on the goal list is to prioritize those recommendations and draft out a work plan of those recommendations. We worked closely with the Capital Budget Committee this year and the Warrant Committee on the Capital Stabilization Fund. And I think that really helped us shape out the Capital Stabilization Fund and led to its successful passage at town meeting. And we've also partnered closely with the Warrant Committee on the budget process synchronization, just opening up lines of communication and trying to provide the Warrant Committee as the town's finance committee with all the information that they need to be able to help make recommendations and to review the town's finances. Next slide, Kate. We're getting to the end here. Was around evaluating Dover's government structure. So the one explicit goal was to conduct a DPW organizational assessment. And naturally, our next step for that will be, I think, to implement those recommendations, but we're able to accomplish the DPW organizational assessment. The other thing that I'd highlight that has come up, it did come up last year, was the concept of a charter review, just so that, again, as we talk about codification of processes and procedures, I think that also extends to boards, committee, and staff, so that everyone understands, frankly, how their roles contribute to the overall organization. And a lot of that isn't, a lot of that is kind of just legacy. Nothing's really been codified. So, that can lead to sometimes confusion as, people come and go. And also, again, that process of having to restart every time you have a new member or a new board. Next slide, Kate. So this is a slide that I just wanted to highlight for the board. As I look back again, I think we're able to accomplish, it's funny, as I give the presentation, and maybe I don't do it justice, it doesn't seem like a lot, but it's actually quite a bit that we're able to move forward. But beyond the explicit goals that the board and focus areas that the board had laid out, we're also able to move forward on a lot of other areas that you'll see highlighted here on the screen. I won't review them all, but it just helps you get a sense of the breadth and depth of everything that we as a community have been working on and accomplished this year. And so that's it. And, I have the honor of being able to give this presentation to the board, but I certainly shouldn't take credit for this. This is truly a community effort. Everyone from the Board of Selectmen to the Warrant Committee to our Capital Budget Committee to Planning Board, all our boards and committees, as well as all this other volunteers in town and all of the other staff that make up the collective Team Dover. So I hope that's been a kind of nice summary of some of the things that we've been working on this year. And I think it'll be a nice springboard as the board goes to set its goals for next fiscal year.
Thanks, Chris. Very well done. And Kate, I'm sure Dave had a lot to do with this as well. And Chris, my comments before Bob and Robin jump in, just for me, in reviewing this last week in preparation for what this was going to be last week, but at 9 o'clock we decided to audible and go to today. I was really impressed by how many things in the way you described it at the very beginning, townwide process management that we implemented, the goal sessions and the planning sessions that we started 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago, when Carl Valente was helping us with these. He kept saying, reduce the number of goals, cut back the number of goals. He would oftentimes weigh in and say, cut it back, you're going to be amazed at how much you have to address. Robin alluded to it earlier, that there are so many things that we had to do over these past several years that were not part of the goals and objectives that became part of it. So I just applaud all the things that the staff and your team has done to continue to move the goals forward. They bleed through year after year, and they become clearer, they become more well-defined, and you can really measure. One of the things that we began 3 years ago was a conversation around every goal was not only management driven, but measurement driven. And you used it in your presentation many times through many different areas, how we're now measuring and getting better at what we have taken and begun last year, the year before, and the year before that. So that's my overview and my quick assessment. Robin, do you want to add?
It's just really impressive, everything that we've done. And, you know, it's a work in process. There's still a lot that we all need to do. And I use the term we lightly because it really is, you know, the staff. I feel as though I float in and out with suggestions, but I'm personally really proud of where we've come over the last, has it been 3 years, John?
Yes, yes.
I think it's 2 that we started doing this.
No.
So it's well, this is Chris's second year, and I think the first
Was
first
with
year
Carl.
was Carl, right?
Was with Carl.
But that was the first half year, right? He took over
Right.
in January.
No, that's exactly right. But you know, and unfortunately, everything you do, as soon as you fixed it, it's time to improve it. So it's a continuous cycle.
It really is.
Job
It really
security.
is. Bob? Thank you, Robin.
And I was going to add, and COVID too.
And COVID too. Yes.
Think
Let's,
about it, right? I mean, everything that got done under the COVID protocols and the care and concern about staff, about, you know, about people in town. And it was just this undercurrent that ran throughout most of that period of time. And it was not trivial.
No.
So that's big. And then the second thing is sort of a personal observation. When you're in the weeds, and I was in the weeds a lot last year, you sort of lose sight of the overall accomplishments because you're dealing in detail across a broad spectrum of issues. And then it's always nice to have this step back and to be able to appreciate just what was accomplished by still a fairly thin staff, but people pulled together and managed to work through any number of issues. So it's sort of a kudos to all.
completely agree. Well said. Well said all around. So thank you, Chris. And thank you again, Kate, Dave, everyone else that put this together. Really well done. It really just is it's a very helpful tool. I know Robin alluded to it. We do it every year. We go back to this, we use this. We'll go back to the year before and the year before that to really bring into focus all of the goals and objectives that we'll work on this summer. So thank you for that. I'm going to move to item 1.2, and that's the special town meeting of the community center and the building finance plan and the potential vote. Again, Chris, I apologize. The packet and for presentation, I know we're going to go into the presentation that you put together. I have that on a separate page, but I just to frame that presentation, if you don't mind, I just want to state for those of you at home and those of you that will watch this as it's being recorded, that a financing plan and the financing plan that we're going to present to you this evening is a combination of flexibility, of data-driven information that we have accumulated over many years of our financial structure and presenting that financial structure to be the most advantageous for the town. The overriding thing that we state as the board year after year is our plan requires a town vote. So everything that you're going to see this evening is subject to your approval. We spend a lot of time talking about free cash. You heard it in Chris's presentation. You heard our financial plan that we all individually have laid out and reiterated year after year. By we, I mean the three of us on the board. And the one thing I hope you hear is a consistency for prudent financial management. And we have now a very experienced team, and where we feel that we are presenting experience-driven data to you. So with that, the overriding goal of the presentation is to make a clear understanding of how we are presenting the project and the impact to the individual taxpayer, both with a stabilization and without a stabilization. So Chris, as that with that frame, would you take over and begin the presentation?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, John. So I wanted to put, as Kate brings up the presentation, I wanted to put a couple of slides together for the board, since this is a continuation of the conversation from last week. I know it was a little difficult for viewers and participants to be able to follow along with references to facts and figures. So I just wanted to get them on paper. So this is really a summary of the presentation from last week with some additional information around cash reserves for you. So the first slide, I start at the very basic, and I will actually preface this entire presentation by saying all of these slides focus only on the base community center project. That's either Article 1 or 2, the new building or the renovated building. I have not included any analysis or costs for the two citizen petition articles, the addition of the recreation space, excuse me, and the addition of the preschool space. That information will certainly be provided to the community leading up to town meeting so that they have an understanding of the cost of those things. But given that the focus, I would say, I have heard from the building committee and from the board has been on the base of the building, I focus this analysis entirely on that. So with that, as I think everyone knows at this point, our cost estimators are estimating that the base cost of a new or renovated building is $18 million. We intend to fund that amount through a 20-year debt exclusion with an estimated borrowing rate of 3.5% that has come from our financial advisors. The 20-year debt service of this is illustrated in the graph. I think what's important to take away from this is declining retirement of the debt, because that decline is important and relates to the next few slides that I'm going to present. So on the next slide, another way to look at this $18 million over 20 years is the annual gross cost to the average taxpayer. We define the average taxpayer as that individual whose home is valued at $1.25 million. So right now, for you to move forward and issue debt at 3.5% for 20 years for this building project, this would be the gross cost per fiscal year for that average taxpayer. So you'll see in the early years, 24, 25, you see a spike where you're paying a bulk of your principal and interest. And then as you start to pay off your interest, those payments decline over time. So the next slide.
And Chris, just for clarification, if you could go back to the previous slide.
Yep.
So the previous slide represents the debt service in totality or the debt service for the incremental $18 million of debt?
The debt service for the totality of the $18 million project.
So I think that's important, maybe to just,
Highlight.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
It is, Robin, it is in bold at the top of the slide. Do you think that should be bigger?
I didn't see it.
I said, if you go down, Kate, back up to the middle one.
No, it just says.
It says
gross cost to
this debt service. So I could, highlight that it's for the project or for the $18 million. So that's the gross cost. If we weren't to do anything else but issue a bond for $18 million, this is what the average homeowner would be looking at as a gross cost to them over the next 20 years. On the next slide. So as we looked at this, we took into consideration two primary goals that I've heard from the board and that the board has expressed from my time here in town is to, with everything we do, we want to ensure affordability for taxpayers and to reduce the overall cost of what we do when possible. And the other is to stabilize the tax rate. And when I say stabilize, my interpretation of that is to minimize any unnecessary spikes, peaks, or valleys in the total tax rate in any given year, so that year over year, taxpayers are used to essentially a consistent tax rate rather than massive spikes or massive declines. And with those two things in mind, there was a way to be able to accomplish both of those toward the $18 million community center project. And that is to apply cash reserves to the debt service to reduce the overall cost of the project and to level out and even out the annual cost to the taxpayers. So in this slide right here with these bar charts, I'm using formula. We did an in-depth analysis that I shared with the board. It's linked here. I'm happy to click on it and go through it if the board would like. But I summarized pretty much the point, the salient point here of the analysis. And it's, if we were to use $4 million of free cash, what do we anticipate our cash reserves to look like over the next 12 years while we're using that amount? Does it impact our cash reserves? And so in the model that we've put together, the top line here, the bar that is in purple, that's difficult to read, is what we anticipate our beginning balance or free cash reserves available to us for that fiscal year. And below that is the percentage of cash reserves as it relates to the prior year's operating budget. The Department of Revenue and other financial practitioners have pegged 15%, have pegged having 15% of cash reserves available to a community for a whole host of purposes, for a bond rating, to protect yourself against financial downturn, and for other financial factors. So I wanted to highlight what our anticipated free cash amount would be in any given year and the percentage of that balance to the prior year's operating budget. And if we go by the 15% threshold, again, based on our analysis, it looks like in every year over the next 12-year period, we stay above that. Does the board want me to open up that analysis, or would you like me to just continue on?
So I think it would be helpful, because I think it would be helpful to articulate what some of the assumptions are that were made to drive this analysis.
Okay.
At a really high level.
Okay. Kate, you mind clicking on the link there?
And I just want to see if this works.
All right. At a high level, I'll quickly run through the model. So the first is we wanted to determine, or we wanted to think about what it is that we in Dover typically use cash reserves for, or free cash, excluding the amount that gets sent back to reduce the tax rate that comes primarily from the school circuit breaker amount. Free cash, for the most part, has been used to supplement the town's capital. So what we did is we took our next 20 years of anticipated capital spend from the capital budget committee, as well as the analysis that the board has done with the on-site insight reports that were done 2 years ago to understand the full universe of expected capital in front of the town, and started with that amount.
So Chris, does the anticipated capital projects, is that buildings as well as vehicles, or is it just the building projects?
No, it's everything.
Okay,
It's computers, buildings, vehicles, lawnmowers,
everything.
everything.
Yeah, because I know we have a couple of, I think there's a fire truck in one of the years.
Yeah.
2025, right?
Yeah.
There's roofs in a fire truck. Okay.
So what we did then is, after we understand what our anticipated capital spend is, well, we look to see what available revenue there is to pay for that. As it's been past practice and has been articulated with the establishment of the Capital Stabilization Fund, the town intends to dedicate 1.5% of the prior year's revenues to pay for recurring capital expenses. So we calculated out what that 1.5% allocation would be, and we were able to determine the delta, whether or not we could afford all of our capital within that 1.5%, or whether there was an overage. And there is, in fact, or shortage, I should say, anticipated in FY23, 24, and 25. As Robin mentioned, we've got some big roof projects, and we've got a fire truck in there as well. So I assumed that we would use free cash for that. That's not the only funding source. The town could find other ways to pay for that, including borrowing. But just for the sake of this exercise, I just said any overage that we can't afford within the 1.5% will go to free cash. You see those amounts listed in the blue in row 9. The next exercise was to anticipate our free cash growth. So what I did is I projected out our operating budget growth in row 13. I netted out the Chickering School because I did not include the circuit breaker that goes back to the taxpayers each year. That changes with enrollment. That's pretty difficult to predict. And by netting it out in this exercise, it keeps the analysis essentially uniform.
So just for clarification, did you exclude in its entirety the Chickering budget, or just the Chickering budget net of the circuit breaker?
I excluded the entire Chickering operating budget, assuming that any turnbacks from Chickering would represent entirely the special ed circuit breaker, which would then go back to the taxpayers to reduce the tax rate. So what I didn't want to do is I didn't want to include them and then overinflate the estimate of free cash. I didn't want to not include the special ed free cash and then overcompensate for that by including Chickering in the overall calculation, if that makes sense. The next,
that in a sense, and I'm thinking out loud here, in a sense, by excluding it, we could be underestimating expenditures, because we do get variability in the school budgets based upon enrollments.
we do.
So
That should get out at the end of the day.
Right. So what I'm trying to come to terms with is the 2% growth rate for the operating budget a reasonable assumption to use for this analysis? And if it's 2 or 5 or 7, depending on the year, I guess all it would do though is reduce the growth in the free cash, right?
If the operating budget, if I use a higher percentage to estimate the operating budget by using the DOR recommendation of generating 3 to 5% of your operating budget, I would just increase essentially the amount of estimated free cash and the percentage of free cash that we had on hand if you were to increase that operating budget percentage. Because that's how we're estimating. I guess that's where I should start, is estimating the generation of free cash by using the DOR target. So that target is a town generate 3 to 5% of its prior year's operating budget. So again, if we were to increase that operating budget, all things being equal, we would just end up increasing the estimated amount of free cash.
But and just to clarify, Robin, Chris highlighted that in the bold section of the green bar in the middle. That is the DOR target rate of 3 to 5.
I know, John. I just think it's helpful to get some explanations for people that are out there that this is complicated. It's not simple.
No. And you 100%, it's not simple. It's not meant to be simple. There's not a simple, I think Chris has done an exceptional job.
And I'm not by any ways, I mean, Chris and I have had numerous conversations. I'm not in any way second guessing what he did. I'm just trying to walk through it and hopefully by thinking out loud and repeating some of the questions that I've already asked, it may help those that choose to watch this to see the effort that went into this.
So
Chris.
yeah, thank you. So sticking in this middle section, the green section, number 2, anticipated free cash. Generally speaking, there's 2 ways that you generate free cash. It is turnbacks or money that is unspent from expenses at the end of the year. And the other is revenues coming in higher than you had budgeted. So what I did was I projected our annual expense free cash growth at 3%. Last year came in around 4. It was the same the year before. So I stuck with 3%. So that assumption means that at the end of the year, all of our operating budgets will turn back a total of 3%. And then for our annual revenue, I targeted a 5% generation. That falls in line with what we have been using as a projection in the past years, at least the past 2 years that I've been here, is to target our local receipts at 95% of prior year actuals. So that other difference on the other end would be a 5% growth. Okay. So in projecting our anticipated free cash growth in the bold and green in rows 17 and 18, you see the number, the 2 totals of the expense and the revenue, and then the percent that number represents of the prior year's operating budget, which again, the DOR says that municipalities should strive to generate free cash in the range of 3 to 5%. The model that we put together puts us at 3.39%. So now that we've determined what we'll be spending cash reserves on, what our anticipated free cash growth is, we can figure out what our net position will be. And that's the final section here. If you can scroll down a little bit, Kate, that's in purple. So starting in column H35, which is our fiscal year ending free cash balance. That's our actual fiscal year ending free cash balance after this year's annual town meeting appropriations. I have just added to that starting point each year, the assumed free cash growth, and then net it out on the anticipated spend or drawdown from cash reserves. And the only anticipated spend from free cash or cash reserves that I've used are those anticipated shortages for the next 3 years of capital, as well as the 12 years of free cash that would be appropriated toward the building project. And that's how I came to row 35, which was illustrated in the previous slide. So this is a pretty, I mean, it's a pretty conservative model. But I think what it shows, my takeaway here is that, what it shows, what we know now is that, I don't think this is a surprise to folks, is that the town has a healthy cash reserve balance, and that by using cash reserves toward this project, all things being equal, you leave yourself with a relatively healthy reserve. There are a lot of unknowns, of course, but I think we've shown through this exercise what can be anticipated.
Well done, Chris. Really, and Jerry, very well done. So,
John, if I could continue
sure.
on the slide just to wrap up, unless there are questions on the free cash analysis piece.
No, do you want to move to slide 7?
Yeah, so I think this is really kind of the crux of the slide, this here. And this is ultimately the cost of the project, the $18 million project, in and of itself, using $2 million of reserves or using $4 million of reserves. So the top tables show the gross cost of the project, applying reserves. In the bottom, which is the slide that we should focus on, is the net impact, or what the taxpayers will see if the community center building moves forward. So you can see the variation on different applications of cash reserves have on various property values.
And with respect to the mechanics of the utilization of the cash reserves, if the town decides to utilize 2 million or 4 million, is that amount set, that amount will be reserved at town meeting, and will that amount be used to pay the debt service, or will that amount be used to reduce the amount of debt?
Yep. So what I'd recommend is if we move forward with a recommendation that whatever amount that is be transferred into the new capital stabilization fund, and that each year that we transfer out an amount. I've got the amounts listed out based on the 2 or 4 million over the next 12 years to reduce the total debt service cost for the project. But you could keep it in reserves and just
Okay. No, I think it's
reserves as a funding source that way. It's just that's a mechanical issue.
right, but I think it's important for people to understand, if you vote for this, you've appropriated it for this specific reason, and the funds, and I think it makes sense. That's exactly what that capital stabilization fund is for. It's for capital items, so it would make sense to move that over there.
And
I would
that goes a little bit against what we talked about. When I say we, it was the people, Carl Valente, Jerry Lane, myself, Chris, etc. If you move 4 million and you put it into an account set up for a specific purpose, you actually lose flexibility in what you in around free cash to be able to react to unanticipated events as you go through time. I thought the beauty of this approach is literally that every year you're asking town meeting to allocate money among various and sundry items, priorities for the town. Now, what I always saw this as a strategy of using both bonding and free cash to achieve important town objectives. And there was some of the options presented used free cash earlier in the process, but I was really afraid to diminish the free cash amount and then sort of tie our hands going in the future when something unanticipated happened. So I was really much more interested in setting up a strategy with a schedule, and then the town would have the options. And I'm presuming that they, since it's all about tax rate stabilization, on how to allocate cash. I would be very, very worried about taking that money and put it into a cap stabilization account, and then only being able to use that money for cap stabilization projects. And we just simply don't know enough about the future to tie up, to me, 1/3 of our 1/5, I guess, depending on the number, of reserves in that kind of an account.
Well, then,
So Bob, just to
this-
clarify, you're suggesting that if you look at slide 8 in year 2024, there's 930,000 using the $4 million. So what you're, let me make sure we're all on the same page. What you're saying is whether we recommend, and again, this is the next step of this, we recommend the financing strategy with the caveat that the strategy has flexibility. If we recommend $4 million or $2 million, the amount that would be voted on each year is the amount that is associated with the year in slide 8.
Correct.
Chris, it can, based on the way we're wording this financial plan, is that something that is consistent with the way you've laid this out?
Yeah, it doesn't matter where the money lives ultimately at the end of the day. Town meeting is going to vote, whether it's in reserves or whether it's in a stabilization fund. The community is going to vote that each year. To Bob's point, however, if you were to move the entire $4 million to capital stabilization, in future years, you would only be able to use it for capital related purposes. So if, let's see, if a prime piece of real estate came on the market and the board decided that, you know what, we'd actually really want to use a bunch of our cash reserves to acquire that, the $4 million wouldn't be available because it'd be tied to the capital stabilization.
Okay, Robin, what were you going to say just now?
So I think if that's the case, really what we are presenting to the town and what taxpayers should be voting on is the first column, because it's not guaranteed that we're going to be using free cash on a year-by-year basis, depending on all the other things that happen. We have a schedule, and to the extent that there's nothing extraordinary that occurs, we will then present to the town to vote based upon the schedule that's presented here, whether or not they want to use an amount of, you know, in 2024, $930,000 to pay for debt service. So it's in effect disingenuous to be selling columns B and C because it's not guaranteed. And that's something that I think everybody needs to really understand. So I think as a taxpayer, you should be focusing on the first column, and, you know, and that could be which, you know, net of the debt, because the old debt is going away, so to speak. So when you vote about this and think about your pocketbook, that's how you should be looking at it, because we can't say with certainty that the impact of utilizing 2 million in free cash or 4 million in free cash will always be available because we don't have control over other things that may potentially happen.
I'm sorry, Robin. I'm sorry on this one. I mean, the board says to the community, here's what our plan is, here's what our strategy is. Now, we've done that with tax rate stabilization. You know, we've made promises around rail trail. I think that we have that's credibility. And I think that the board has credibility with the town, and we can clear, and I think that it is a trade-off between sequestering $4 million or allowing the town flexibility with the understanding that our priorities are to use that money to.
Bob, I'm not disagreeing with you. I just think
Well,
we need to be absolutely transparent and get the point across that this is our plan, but we may not be able to always execute on our plan. So as a taxpayer, you know, what you should be focusing on is the impact of the first column. You know, we plan to whatever amount we choose, but, you know, I heard you say, Bob, unless I misunderstood what you said each year we will vote this at town meeting, not the Board of Selectmen. The town will vote whether or not they want to utilize the amount of free cash that is specified over the 12 years to help service the debt.
Isn't that true of the cap stabilization fund?
It's the same, but the question I was asking, what are we presenting here? What are we voting on? If it's in the stabilization fund, it's been put aside and the town's committing to that. If there's a hurricane,
right? It's not automatic, it's the same process.
Right, but the way this is being sold, what people are calling me up and saying, it's only going to cost me $50 more. It's a great deal. That's great, but what you need to understand is there could be a circumstance where it's going to cost you the full amount. And I just want to make sure that taxpayers understand that. You know, it's just important to me that people understand that.
Okay, but that goes for both, right?
I'm sorry, Bob, can you repeat what you just said?
No, it just, what Robin has said it applies to both scenarios. It's just that we don't know the future. What's the best way to address the present and preserve our options for the future?
Right,
we really intend to do A, or whatever it is. And I'm not trying to sell anything.
Bob, I'm not saying you're trying to sell it, but this is the takeaway that people have. You know, people hear what they want to hear. So I just want to make sure that it is clearly articulated, you know, what the plan is. That is important to me because, you know, so that is all I'm trying to say here.
But Robin,
what people take away from this presentation is their, you know, is their issue, but as long as we are articulate and make clear the mechanics of how this is going to work, I have no issue with it.
This presentation is consistent with presentations that we've made towards OPEB, towards open space, towards a number of projects, specifically the projects that we talk about every year with stabilization of the tax rate and utilization of free cash. We go to great pains each year to tell the taxpayers we are utilizing your money in a very consistent, prudent manner that is consistent with our goals and objectives. I think we're saying the exact same thing, and we're utilizing the exact same strategy and methodology.
John, the only point I was making here was I don't want people to walk away assuming that it's guaranteed that the $4 million will be used to service the debt, period.
I understand that.
Okay, that's the only point. This is an excellent presentation, and the fact that the presentation is so good is allowing us to have this discussion.
Bob?
I'm ready to move if you're ready to move.
Okay. So Chris, is there anything that you would like to add to the, to slide number 8? Is there anything else you'd like to comment?
In reference to slide number 8, the only thing I'd add is if Kate could just scroll down to it. So if anyone's viewing this evening, this is just the anticipated annual appropriation of free cash over the 12-year period that I've mentioned. If we were to use, if the board were to recommend and use 2 million or 4 million, this is the annual amount of cash reserves that would be used.
So this is where I'm a little confused. If we're making a recommendation that if everything goes according to plan, we are earmarking $4 million of our undesignated cash reserves to be used to service the debt, right? But each year, when we pull together the budget, we are going to be, in a sense, voting on the allocation of that $4 million to a specific year, which begs the question, why are we voting on the 4 million now when each year we're going to be voting on a piece of it? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, I think the answer to that question is, it is the intent of the Board of Selectmen to recommend this strategy. And the strategy, with all its components and all its parts, is consistent with our financial management. Would you add, Bob, would you add anything to that?
No, I think that's right. I think we're trying to present to the town the complexity of the situation. We're trying to show the town how we have been thoughtful about mitigating the impact on that borrowing will have. And particularly, I think in our discussions, we were very concerned in particular about older residents. And yeah, it's complicated. And yes, we have to go through this process on an annual basis. And what it shows is that on an annual basis, the amount of free cash that we use to stabilize the tax rate relative to the borrowing is relatively minor.
Correct.
People are getting all upset about the $4 million number. Well, over 12 years, that's like $350,000 a year. And so the actuality of it is we'll be allocating a relatively modest amount on a yearly basis to stabilize the portion of the tax rate that it applies to the borrowing. I think that gives you a very clear picture of what we will be asking the town to allocate for this purpose.
So, and I agree with that. So in the effort to move this from the presentation to a recommendation, I would suggest the wording of the motion be, we move to recommend $4 million be allocated for the use of stabilization of the financing of the Carroll Community Project. Chris, is that consistent with our intent? And does that give the town the correct framing of this motion?
Well, I think you should add comma, and on an annual basis, such appropriations shall be recommended by the Board of Selectmen and voted on at town meeting. Because this is not binding. What we're voting on right now is not binding. It's a desire or to utilize, of an intent to utilize $4 million of free cash.
Over the period of the life of the fund.
Right. So, you know, so for, you know, 3 other people in 6 years can be sitting in our seats, and they may decide this isn't a wise thing, and they may decide not to recommend, you know, the use
Correct.
of free cash.
And
And
that's
then,
consistent
which is why I was making the point I made on the previous slide. You know, what we really should focus on is what is, or make sure that taxpayers focus on, is the net increase to their tax bill without the utilization of cash reserves.
Right.
Because we have no control over the future.
Right.
You know, right now, looking into our crystal ball and looking at this great analysis, it looks like this is a slam dunk, right? But who knows?
Correct. The same can be said with all the other things that we utilize free cash for. So
I'm not saying we can't, John. However, when you put free cash in a stabilization fund, the difference is that it can only be used for that specific item. So,
Completely.
you know, the difference here is it's just our general reserves, and it's discretionary each year. You know, it's not discretionary to the Board of Selectmen. You know, each year the town will have a voice.
Right.
Each year the taxpayers will vote whether or not they want to use these funds.
What has been very clear to me and to the board and to town meeting is, over the past 5 years, we have established a pattern which is easily recognized at town meeting when our strategy has been challenged. Every year for the past 5 years, the challenge has been overridden, and our strategy has been consistently approved by the voters. So
That's not being debated here. What's being, you know, all we're trying to do is to make clear
I'm
what
agreeing
the
with you.
intent is.
I am agreeing with you. So can I go back? Because you're so good at it, Robin, can you read, or can you reiterate the motion that I began using the comma that you added?
John, could I make just a kind of point of clarification just for the board?
Please.
If the board were to appropriate to commit to the lump sum to the capital stabilization fund, almost everything that you would want to almost anything that comes to you in the future would probably come to you as a capital item and be eligible to be paid out of the capital stabilization fund. Debt service can be paid for out of the capital stabilization fund. So if you were to bond a parcel of land, you could pay that debt service out of the capital stabilization fund. If the townhouse fell down in a tornado tomorrow, you could use that $4 million to pay for. I just want to make it clear that most of the unknowns would likely come in the form of capital and would be eligible to be paid for out of the capital stabilization fund, as it relates to the concern about tying up, so to speak, $4 million of cash reserves. I just want to make sure that
that's a very good point. So essentially, it really is semantics as to where the money lives. This cash lives.
Only if you discount things happening to the town that you need money for that aren't capital. If Chris's assumption is correct that the most likely scenario is it's all capital, then that makes sense. If your assumption is, like Robin, we don't predict the future, then the question is, what's the value of leaving it in free cash as a hedge against unanticipated items?
I totally understand and agree, Bob. My question to Chris is, and to you, does it matter how we frame this motion? Does that reality that you just described matter in terms of how this motion is framed tonight?
Well, I think from a warrant perspective, Chris, would there have to be an amendment if you wanted to move this into the stabilization fund at town meeting? Because you need a town meeting vote, correct, to move it into a stabilization fund?
Yeah, it would be voted for at, you could do it this year's town meeting, or we don't have the first appropriation until 2024. So it could be next year. I think there's two things here, right? One is a board's recommendation on the financing plan so that we can communicate to the public what the anticipated cost of the project is. That's the first motion, so you can just say that, I move to, endorse, the financing plan using X amount of dollars. And then if the board wants to make a decision on either recommending to move that amount to a capital stabilization fund, or alternatively taking the annual approach that you recommended, you don't really need to make a motion either way at this point. I think though it probably would be helpful if the board is ready to indicate which way they'd like to move forward, because then we can shape out the warrant to make sure that it's reflective of that.
Okay. Okay, so here's, Chris, what I heard you say with regards to the language of what we would do this evening. And if we move to endorse the financing plan as proposed, utilizing the strategy of $4 million of free cash over the period of the financing, and then the comma again to what, Robin, can you repeat what you said at that point?
Well, what I understood Bob was presenting and was that he I'm not exactly sure what we're voting on right now, to be honest. So what I heard Bob saying was that his view was, or the way he envisioned this financing occurring, and Bob, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, was that the Board of Selectmen would communicate to citizens of Dover that it is our intent to use $4 million of free cash over a 12-year period to service the new debt that we are potentially going to have in connection with the Carroll Community Center. That debt service would be voted on an annual basis as part of the town budget, and the town would decide whether or not that debt service should be utilized, that free cash should be utilized to pay for the debt service. So each year you would be voting for that up to $4 million over the next 12 months. Alternatively,
financing plan.
Right. So, which goes back to my point, I'm not even sure why we're voting about this, because we're not appropriating any of the funds.
Because
so, maybe what we should be saying is, it is our intent to use up to $4 million of free cash to service the new debt associated with the Carroll Community Center, so long as it's available each year.
So what's wrong with I move to approve the financing plan for the renovated or community center as presented, or stick $4 million in there?
Because that financing plan to me is just $18 million of debt. Because the rest of the stuff is on an annual basis that we're going to make. It's actually binding on an annual basis.
Right.
It's not binding today. So right now, the only thing that I think we're voting on is $18 million of debt.
We're voting on
no, right? We're not. We need to tell the community, right, as part of our communication strategy, what the impact of this borrowing is going to be. we put together a financing plan. The financing plan has been discussed pretty in depth tonight. And so all we're voting for is saying we approve the financing plan as presented.
But the issue I have is the financing plan is not binding. So again, it goes back to slide number 7. On slide number 7, what is binding to the town and to the taxpayer is the first column, which is the $18 million without the utilization of cash reserves.
I'm sorry, Robin, that's your position. I think that my position is we have demonstrated that we have integrity and we have demonstrated that we can execute. And so my position is the town has confidence in its elected board to do what they've said they were going to do. That's just a difference of opinion.
But Bob, all I am saying is it is not binding to use the $4 million. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
Yeah,
because each year we're gonna vote on it. And that's, it's binding if you make a decision and you say today, I wanna put, but even then, even if you put the $4 million into the capital stabilization fund, all you're saying is we're gonna use this $4 million over time on capital. So,
well, so Robin, is your word binding? Is the Board of Selectmen's word a binding?
No, but a vote is binding. In my opinion, a vote is binding.
Go back. Continue to disagree.
Right, Robin. I think if we go back to what Chris just said, we're not binding. We're not proposing. The motion is not to propose binding the town for a specific to take that money specifically this year and use it without discretion over the 12-year, over the 20 years.
But then to my point, why are we voting? I just don't understand why we're voting on this.
Voting to
you guys, you can move and decide to vote, and I'll just abstain because I don't understand why we're voting on this.
Chris, could you repeat why we're voting on this, please?
I think, I'd go back to John's initial comment, and that's a comment that over the past 5 years or so, the Board of Selectmen has worked to put forward plans, especially around financial plans, to the community and has recommended them, right? The Board of Selectmen is the town's executive board. The community looks to you to make recommendations on the best path forward for the town. And so a vote this evening, all it says is that the Board of Selectmen believes that it's in the town's best interest to finance the community center project by using $4 million in cash reserves. And now if you want to spread that out over 12 years, you can add that. But that allows the building committee to be able to communicate that the Board of Selectmen have voted on Thursday or Wednesday evening that they intend to utilize cash reserves over the next 12-year period in order to help reduce spikes in the tax rate and lower the cost of the project.
No, I understand that, but again, the issue I grapple with is I certainly support a community center. I support, I think this is something the community needs. I understand that it is our intent to use $4 million in cash, but we can't guarantee that $4 million will always be around. And that's the only point I'm trying to make. So, I certainly support the financing plan as presented. However, I just want to make sure that everybody understands that we may not have the $4 million. The $4 million isn't being voted on and set aside for this purpose. It may be used for something else. So this plan, just like our financial plans, are something that it's a strategy, and it's a strategy that we're trying to implement. So this is the same thing. The only thing that's certain in my mind is the $18 million of debt.
Agreed. So I think that From a
So if
wording
you're
standpoint,
asking me if I support a financing plan?
yes,
Sure, I
Yes.
support a financing plan. It's just not binding.
the motion is to endorse the financing plan as proposed, utilizing a $4 million sum of free cash over a 12-year period to service the debt of the Carroll Community Center. That's the motion.
And
Second.
such, and
We have a
such,
seconded by Bob, but I'm sorry, Robin.
so I'm going to amend it and
Okay.
say that such, and say that the $4 million will be voted on by the town on an annual basis and be appropriated, based upon that.
I won't second that amendment.
But that's the strategy. All right, then I'm going to abstain from voting.
Okay, so John, the motion was made and I seconded it.
Okay. All in favor? Aye, John Jeffries.
Aye, Bob Springett.
I'm against it.
Okay,
Okay. Thank you for that very in-depth, very well-prepared analysis, Chris. I'm going to move to item 1.3, and this is the article of the frequently asked questions or the executive summary. And Bob, you were the original author, so I'm going to let you give the high-level explanation, if you don't mind, because I know the hour is late and we can probably do this pretty quickly.
I hope so. So this is version 4.5, something or other, I think. Not sure which one it is. It incorporates the work that the committee did, trying to put together an executive summary. It's modeled on efforts that have been done in the past to inform citizens about what the special town meeting is about, what the articles are, brief explanation of the articles. And in this particular document, which I think should be ultimately deleted, is the don't think we need to include these scenarios in the document. This document has been updated. Article 4 now has a summary of their rationale for their ask of additional space. I redrafted that. It's in a second version. And that's been reviewed by Chris Boland and Mark Capone, who accepted the explanation. And Article 5, which is the citizens warrant, we've got a repricing today from our architect and consulting team, and it looks like that project's going to cost in the vicinity of $6.5 to $7.5 million. So that needs to be updated. Otherwise, there are a couple of additional, let's say, wordsmithing / amendments, but those are the two largest, and we'd have to go back and amend the charts that relate to the net annual increase to the taxpayer and the average annual cost to the taxpayer, because in those slides we actually add preschool space, and those numbers are going to have to be amended, and the total for all of the 5 articles, the 3 funding articles, would also have to be amended. Otherwise, so I would, if this is acceptable to the board, then I would propose a motion that says if we approve it as amended, or you could bring it back to another meeting. But again, we're running out of time to get this out to the citizens.
Robin, would you like to add anything?
Only thing I would add, looking at the version, let me just bring it back up, is on the tax impact of borrowing on the table, the net average annual increase is that with or without free cash utilization? I would just
That's
make
with
sure
free-
that,
The first truck is with free cash.
so you might just want to add it where it says net annual increase, just say assuming free cash utilization.
Okay.
Okay.
And then
So-
for the second chart, are you proposing you're going to delete the column with the preschool with Article 5, or are you going to keep it in but just with updated numbers?
Chris?
Yeah, I'll update the numbers. As Bob mentioned, we got some news about updated numbers for the preschool late today. So I'll make sure that, we calculate those out and get those over to you guys.
So are you both comfortable with the motion as amended to accept the executive summary of the Carroll Community
Yep,
articles as amended?
yep, second.
All in favor? Aye, John Jeffries.
I, Robin Hunter.
Hi, Bob Springett.
Approved. Thank you. Thank you both for the edits. I know that we've all looked at this document many, many times. And as Bob has mentioned, and we have all discussed, it is quite literally a moving target. And literally, as the day goes by, things change. And it's a very hard thing to do. But in the spirit of having our citizens and taxpayers as prepared as possible, we just think that this is a very important thing to do. So we hope you'll understand that while it is a work in progress, it is our best intent.
Well, all you have to do is put a statement on the bottom that say the information provided is as of whatever the date.
Can you put the hour? Is it, so we're changing.
Like you have forward-looking statements on your financial statements, so just put a disclaimer.
So I've run out of version numbers on the documents that I've been working on related to Carroll.
Based upon, right.
Yeah. Kate, are there anybody in the audience? Are there any other orders of business to address this evening? I can't, no. I think, well, that's
We're good,
all.
John.
I think we're all good.
Yeah, so I will make a move, I will accept a motion to adjourn at 8:20 p.m.
Second,
All in favor? Aye, John Jeffries.
I, Robin Hunter.
Hi, Bob Springett. Thank you all. Have a nice evening.